Everybody, to the Center for International Private Enterprise, and we are really excited today to have a conversation. And I would say this is going to be a little bit different than a sort of a typical type of facilitated presentation here. It is really, given the size of the room and a lot of experts, some of whom I've had the pleasure of just meeting, I think we can all benefit from more of a conversation. And so you're all welcome to ask questions throughout the presentations, and I'll try to make this as interactive as possible. So I'm joined here by Greta Kolher from the American Society of Association Executives, and she is the Chief Global Development Officer. To my immediate left is Rick O'Sullivan. He is the Principal of Change Management Solutions. Of course, then, my name is Lars Benson, and I'm the Africa Director here at the Center for International Private Enterprise. So I'll just do a very brief introduction, and then perhaps let both Greta and Rick do a more proper introduction of their organizations and their background. So, frankly, I had a lot of experience working for journalists and working in the private sector, and up until about probably about 15 years ago, I never understood what associations did. The ones that I saw overseas weren't terribly impressive. And and then I was hired to come up with like strategic plans for associations, and God forbid, what I probably should go back and read what I put together for a poor women's association in Angola 15 years ago, because if I knew then what I know now, it would be definitely a lot different. And I think I've had the pleasure here at CIPE, which is the Center of International Private Enterprise, to really learn a lot more and be able to gain a lot of practical experience in terms of working with chambers and associations, specifically across Africa. So the Center for International Private Enterprise was started over 35 years ago. It is an affiliate of the National Endowment for Democracy, and we're also affiliated to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And clearly we have a series of different focus areas that we work on that range from women economic empowerment to democratic governance to anti-corruption, to working on issues as well of the association capacity building. And so really that is the focus of our conversation that we're going to have over the next hour, a little over an hour. With that, I'm going to just pass it quickly to Greta. Greta, if you don't mind, saying a few words.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. I'm Greta Kolher with ASAE, and as he said, I have the role of I think I have the best job in the whole place, but Chief Global Development and now Credentialing Officer. I've been at ASAE for about 16 years, and I've had different roles, and one of my very favorite roles, I have to say it, Susan, is when I worked with Susan Sarfati when she was at the center at ASAE, the Center for Association Leadership. So that was a great time, and she was a great colleague and continues to be a wonderful friend. So I just wanted to say that, so welcome, Susan.
And I came today because you're so brilliant. I want to hear what you have to say.
Oh dear, now I know we're all in trouble. But I think in ASAE, some of you, any members and CAE, congratulations, which we'll talk about in a minute, certifications. ASAE is an individual membership organization. In this year, our 100th birthday, so we have been around and seen some things, and I think tried to make some changes and tried to move fast as we go, but sometimes that's difficult. Now with associations, we do the same thing many associations do. We have a very large education offering, over 80 programs a year online, face-to-face. We do knowledge development through resources, through websites, through research. And I'm saying these because I think these are the things that associations really do here and around the world. And then build community, of course, people coming together, building community, and then advocacy. And I'm not going to say anything about advocacy today because Rick has a wonderful definition that's probably better than the definition we've been using. But this is really, as I looked at the content for today, the role of associations in really offering government-type partnerships and programs. I mean, everybody in the organization that we have, I mean, you can just look at example after example of the things that we'll talk about today. We have about 44,000 individual members. That doubled when we took in organizations, as organizations where the individuals are. So that's a fairly new initiative for us, and that's grown our membership very much over the last couple of years. We are in 50 countries around the world, and I think most importantly, we do have, in my role in the global area, we've really focused on the Asia Pacific region. We've been doing a conference there for the past, we're getting ready for our 5th year. We'll go to Bangkok this year, October 11th through 14th, so we'd love to have you there. And we have offices in Beijing and in Seoul, Republic of Korea. So what we've learned about associations in the United States and out of the United States, I think really, has some very interesting information for us today. But that's who I am. I also came from the American Society for Training and Development. So training, learning, all of those things are really part of my background. So very glad to be here.
Rick?
And I'm Rick O'Sullivan, Principal of Change Management Solutions, which is a boutique consultancy working with civil society organizations, both domestically and overseas, to help them to identify, understand, and harness the forces of change, and adapt to the changing environments that we're seeing daily. Prior to that, I was the assistant director at the Center for Civil Society Studies at Johns Hopkins University, and developed a reputation for being knowledgeable of the economics of civil society and associations, to the point where I kept being brought in the waning months of a 3, 4, 5-year project to be told in a panic, we need to make our local partner self-sustaining. Needless to say, this is something that cannot be done in a 5-day workshop, which is what my assignment was. But over the course of these, I wound up creating a number of tools that I could leave behind for these poor, helpless managers that they could then use to become self-sustaining. I left them lying around here one day, apparently, because Lars called me and said, I like these tools, can you possibly knit them together into a course so that when we wrap up with the, after we, these organizations will be able to stand on their own, which we did, and we launched it in East Africa. And it turns out, through a separate contact at the U.S. Conference for Catholic Bishops, that they were having the same problem with faith-based organizations that Lars was having with secular associations. So put together a deal where we provide the content, they provide the local capacity, and this course is now part of the degree and certification programs for the church management programs at the Catholic University of Eastern Africa. What you
Which
see in
university?
Catholic University of Eastern Africa, Korea. And what you have in front of you are a couple of the handouts from that course. And we'll be referencing them as we go through. And when Lars and I first started scheming about putting something together about educating for associations, I said, we've got to get Greta in here because to explain exactly what associations do and why it is important that you get it right. Because on more than one occasion when I talk about associations globally or in developing markets, what I hear is we tried the American association model and it doesn't work here. You can imagine I levitated out of my chair, being the subtle, soft-spoken guy that I am, and explain to them that no, you have no idea what the American association model is, and more importantly, by making those types of statements, you are undermining American associations' efforts to go global, which is happening more and more, and I'm sure Greta will get into that. So that's why I'm here today.
Excellent, thank you. So I did promise this was going to be sort of a facilitated conversation, and I think one of the the things in terms of sort of to frame our conversation moving forward, we're going to actually throw out a couple. We're going to have everybody take a quiz, and you can think about it from your perspective. And a lot of you are association experts, so I expect we'll have all of the right answers right up front. But this is just, if we take a look at where do associations earn their revenues, associations and chambers themselves are often terribly confused about where that should be coming from, or they're terribly focused on one component of that and forgetting about everything else they're leaving off the table in terms of potential revenue sources. And this is a critical part in terms of trying to help associations and chambers, at least as CIPE does overseas, in terms of trying to diversify the revenues. So let's see how well this room does in terms of asking a couple questions. So on average, what percentage of an association revenues comes from dues? Your choices are 25%, 45%, 65%?
On the average where?
In the U.S.
In the US.
But actually-
You're talking the US.
Yeah.
Okay,
But actually,
25.
these hold.
What?
These tend to hold, yeah.
I didn't
Or
know.
85%.
20.
Okay. So
You don't
Susan
want
is.
the answer.
Well, no, we do. So I expected we would get all the right answers, but I mean, and so we'll
Oh,
come
it's
to
a
you,
quiz
Susan.
where you write.
Yes.
You can write this down.
Everyone copy off of Susan now.
But Susan is correct. 25% of your revenues come
Say another
typically
word.
from membership dues. Grants account for what portion of an association revenues on average? Grants given by governments or by potentially a foundation. What percentage of revenues? Your choices are 40%, 30%, 20%, or 10%. Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Want to take a poll?
How many people say 40%? How many people say 30%? How many people say 20%? And how many of you say 10%? All of you who say 10%, your answer is correct. And so also, you know, keep this in mind, especially if you're working in international development, as we're working with different associations or chambers and have an opportunity to see where their revenues are coming from. And maybe too often this is lopsided in terms of membership dues and donor funding. On average, what percentage of an association's budget is committed to advocacy? And we have 70%, 50%, 30%, 10%. So we're now talking about how much do they spend on advocacy, or how much do associations spend on advocacy on an annual basis of their total revenues? Anybody want to hazard a guess?
Probably the lower side.
Good. That's correct.
20%.
10.
I mean,
So, my colleague here gets the prize for 10%. Most association resources that they earn are committed to lobbying government agencies. Well, clearly we sort of gave that one away. And so that's not it. Education and training, membership exclusive services, or public relations. So education and training is one category, member exclusive services, or public relations.
This is where they spend the most?
Yeah.
Or-
Education and training.
Excellent. So most of associations are spending the majority of their budgets on education and training. Compared to their advocacy activities, associations spend how much on PR? Half as much, about the same, twice as much?
do not answer this question. You and Susan. Not multiple choice.
Their members?
Their list, yeah.
Their membership list? Okay, anybody else?
We say our members.
Your members, okay?
Their network, more often?
Network, all right. Well,
development, certifications, product testing.
There were choices.
Yes, you have 10%, 20%, 30%, or 40%.
Of all associations in the US, how many of them have some sort of regulatory responsibility?
So, excellent. I mean, people are leaning in the right direction. So it's actually about 40%. Okay. So I think that sort of warms up the conversation, and for those of us that, you know, you do have different studies as well, I believe, by the Association of American Executives that Greta belongs to, that actually puts out these some of these studies. I know that because I use it frequently in terms of some of, as a reference when I'm talking about these overseas. But I guess, you know, this comes back to a question that Greta also talked about in terms of her introduction, and I'd actually like to just have her answer this in terms of, so what role do associations really play?
Wow. Well, when
It's a big one.
a big one. I mean, I think that associations really play a huge role in several areas. In fact, we've tried to identify these areas with an initiative that we've had since 2008 called The Power of A, the Power of Associations. And the history of this particular initiative was that when Obama first came in, and I think I'm right on 2008, we wanted to really work with government, almost to orient government to the important role that associations would play and the important role that the associations could play, you know, in many of the government initiatives. So that's where this initiative came from. It's called The Power of A, and I think as I looked at the materials that you have and that Rick has handed out, I think that everything here that I'm going to say fits within this, because the power.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah. Right. So the Power of A, the real tenets or pillars of the Power A are associations build a stronger economy. That clearly is, you know, could be is an important area of government where associations play a large role. Enhancing job skills, and I think we just talked about the percentage of education. Associations in the U.S. are the largest source of post-secondary education, and we do have that documented. They are the largest source. Now, I came from the American Society for Training and Development, as I said, and when I heard that, I thought, well, where are they in this area? But really, the associations themselves are the largest source. It's in continuing education, it's in building new technical skills, it's in building all the skills that we need for whatever industry it is. So I think that's a key, which also fits very much with the role with government. I think the third one is to improve structures and systems. It's really, the wording we would like to change because it says strengthens America's safety and security, and I do have some examples of some groups that came forward, but we're also really within ASAE trying to look at these more globally, and so I think, you know, in increasing and strengthening the world's safety and security, and then strengthening lives, and that's really with all the standards that we talk about, standards for safety, where associations play an enormous role, and we have some documents that show that associations build standards for health, for safety, much faster than the government can. In fact, one of the international standards, ISO standards, my understanding is that takes about 5 years to get a standard in place. And we have an association that was able to really work with colleagues and other organizations and put together a very important standard for safety in really 6 or 7 months. And I think, you know, that's where associations come in. We already said the percentage of associations that do standards, some kind of certification, but it's a very, very important role within the U.S. and around the world. ASAE is looking at, we have a credential, the Certified Association Executive, and we have some people here who have that credential. But we're also looking at that credential, you know, more globally, and the problem with our credential is the problem with other credentials that are formed in the U.S. is that about 80% deals with associations management that can be somewhat generalized, But there's the 20% that's really about U.S. laws and U.S. relation to government. And that does change in other places around the world. And Rick has a very good site that shows, and I'm going to get the exact name of it, but shows the role, the legal role of associations in different countries around the world. But I think the power of those categories help give a framework to what ASAE does regarding, in answer to your question, regarding, you can look at all of those things and say those are things that also government can do, but can't do because of funding and can't do because of expertise, and that's where associations really play a vital role.
Excellent. Thank you, Greta.
Yeah.
When we take a look, Rick, at sort of diversifying revenues or different types of revenue sources for associations, is there anything that an association can't offer?
Absolutely. There are certain things they should not do. Before I answer that, I wanted to add to one thing to Greta's remarks. The value of associations in terms of working with the government is political cover. That associations can work with government to allow decisions to be made that if a politician had to play to his base, he couldn't. The best example of this is NAFTA. While some may claim it's the worst deal ever written, not naming names, I was involved in that, working for the American textile manufacturers at the time. And when it came to harmonizing and coming up with agreement as to what could be traded openly and not, it was the textile and apparel industries of the three countries getting together and saying, this is what we can live with, that's what you can live with, that, and then presented our, said, it went to the negotiators and said, present this and no one's going to scream. So it gave the negotiators, gave the government the cover they needed to make the concessions that needed to be made to get the deal done. So while people question our negotiating our treaties, I assure you, private industry's fingerprints are all over those things. And they're participants and help the government to make concessions. What they found out, on the other hand, where you don't have that sort of association role in East Africa, according to the World Bank's Doing Business Index, that after the East Africa formed the East African Common Market, trade became more restrictive because without the associations there to advise and to make concessions with their peers in other countries, all the negotiators went in and said, my job is to protect my industry. And they actually wound up creating more NTBs than what they started. So this additional role, important role in a globalized environment, is associations and the civil society is really the only ones who can do the cross-border type of decisions that need to be made. I found it interesting that for example, regulating access to water, and 75% of the arable land in the world, responsible for 50% of all food produced, is managed by voluntary associations, not government agencies. Because water has this tendency of not paying attention to national boundaries. So when you start talking about now looking at the environmental crisis, the role of associations is going to become even more important, as not just advising the government, but as actually regulating.
How does that generate revenues, though?
All right. Yes. Well, everything that Greta mentioned was a business line. The training, the education, the standards. You put together a standard, and you have a certification that meets the standard. And so, first of all, you publish the standards, and you have training courses, which generate revenue. And then you have people take the exam, which generates revenue. Then after they get pass the exam, then they get to use the logo, which is a royalty that generates revenue. Those of you, how many people here have bought a house? How many people here work through a realtor? How many people know that the word realtor does not exist in the English language? That was a word created by the National Association of Realtors. Every time someone uses the word, in fact, uses the word realtor, he better be talking about someone from NAR who has actually passed the exam. Otherwise, they're facing a lawsuit. So that's just in the standard side. Conferences, you asked what they should not be doing. As I said, when I put together this course, the course outline, a detailed course outline covering every day for 6 days in pieces, goes 22 pages of little boxes that we just went. On 22 pages, the words conflict of interest appear 27 times. When I was working for ATMI, we came up with the standards for electronic data interchange. In case you're wondering what that is the backbone of what would become electronic commerce. So no, Al Gore didn't invent the internet. I did. At least the textile part of it. And when we came up with those standards, well, we're now going to have training. Well, this would have been a great revenue source. We threw it out into the public domain and invited people to take up this course. Why? Why did we not bring that in-house? Why did we say we want other people to take this that would cost us a bloody fortune to produce? I was spending every Thursday for 2 years in Charlotte.
North Carolina?
Huh?
That's where I'm from. Sorry.
The Adams Mark Hotel, conference room 6.
Beautiful. Yeah, really, that's a great part of town.
So why did we give this away? Because what would have been good for the association, this would generate a lot of revenue, was not good for our members. We wanted competition among trainers to come up with the best course. If we did it ourselves, what we came up with would probably be good, but would have been the best. And if someone came up with a better system, would we have let them in? Very often, people looking for ways to help associations generate revenue. 2 really, really bad ideas that I hear all the time is, one, we're going to have a bulk purchasing system. Do not do that. And even worse, microfinancing. We're going to have microfinancing to our members so that they will now be in hock to us. So if a new business comes along who's more competitive and can put this guy out of business, who owes us money, do we let the new member in? So these are the issues. Whenever you talk about any product, any service an association has, the first question is find the conflicts of interest.
Thank you. Yeah. When we, Greta, one of the things that ASA is doing, specifically your role as Chief Globalization Officer, is, I imagine from what I've been able to understand, is sort of helping associations that are your members or here in the United States go overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work?
Well, I think that, we've had it's kind of in a couple of different areas. I mean, one is the idea of we want to go global. We have we really want to do that, and why? And I think and then the group that we're really working with now are those that have been doing this for about 5 or 6 years, who've, had some experience, who've tried to develop some new products and services. And I think the main, I guess what we would say is be sure that you have a goal, that you understand why you're doing this, because it's not easy work for associations. I think if you look at your own strengths, your products and services, your industry, your profession, and see where might that, where might there be some partnerships around that, where might there be some need around that. But I think what we really try and look at is get a, not a firm strategy, but have a reason why you're doing this, to assess kind of what the needs are, where you're going. Because I think one mistake people can make is just that we'll go and do everything just like we do it here in every place in the world. And that's why it's very important to decide where you're going to start, country or city or region, to decide, and what are you trying to accomplish and what are they trying to accomplish. We have a lot of, we've actually just did a session ourselves. It was a global day, and we brought people together, and they were really talking about, how they have sustained their effort financially, how they have, built products and services that are not exactly taking your own thing and just putting it in some other country. Things need to be customized. They need to meet a need in the country where you're going. So I guess what we really see groups doing is having a reason why they're doing it, but starting with some goals or a specific country, a specific partner, and partnership is very important in this initiative as well. Having the right partner, doing the work to have the right partner, and not feeling like you can be all things to all people. You just can't. The world is not the United States and the rest of the world, and it's really, every country, every city, every region, has its own needs. And I think we've found that, we have staff in both Korea and China, and we found we really couldn't do this work without the staff there. We can't just go 6,000 miles and deliver something from the U.S. And I think that's what you all are doing. You're in the area, you're working there, you're seeing the needs, and then trying to figure out how does that work with the mother, father, sister organization.
Do you have a couple of examples of some associations that have done this successfully that you like to use?
Well, I mean, we work with a group. I'm going to give you the very most successful ones because we work with a group. It's called the Key Global Associations Committee. Actually, I'm going to start with a different one. I'm going to start with the International Coach Federation. That's a good one because that's more a service, and it's more a human service. So the International Coach Federation started to get some demand from outside of the U.S. and they developed, they have a credential as well, coaching credential that they've put together. They've actually put it together with input from different parts of the world that are going to be using it. They have done it in about eight or 10 languages, which the CEO of that would say to us, if we're looking at a global credential, stay with English as long as you can. That would be her advice, but they've got 8 or 10 languages, and they have chapters around the world, and they really do a number of training programs around the world. But they started small, and now I think they're in, they're in, very many countries with chapter offices, with chapter or some kind of a subdivision office and regional offices. And the woman that is the CEO she heads our international section at this point, and she's, kind of like always on the road. But the big offer they have is that coaching is important, that coaching serves a purpose, and they are training individual coaches in many, many parts of the world with a certification as well. The example I was going to start with is more the Society of Petroleum Engineers. Obviously that's international already, and we work very closely with the head of that, the CEO of that, and what they do around the world. And they've started obviously in places that are oil countries, that are petroleum countries. They're located in Houston, but they do a lot of work in the Middle East was the area that they started in, and they do the same thing. They have certification of individuals, they do some accreditations. So I think, again, this theme of coming back to education, certification, accreditation, building the skills of the individuals and building the capacity of the organizations. So those are two that I can go on. I have a lot of examples.
I've written these two down because definitely I can do some research on them.
One that I know about, if you want to write that down, is the International Franchise Association. I had the opportunity to speak, and it was in Bahrain for the State Department, and they had somebody speaking from the International Franchise Association, and they're working all over the world to build businesses and have set up chapters all over the world. And they're quite strong.
Can just follow up on some of Greta's comments?
Sure.
When you talk about going to English, one of the leading organizations for an international is the International Institute for Certified Internal Auditors. And he told me, he said, one of the first countries we went into and proved to be one of the worst countries to go into was the UK. Because after all, they speak English, we speak English, right? When I'm working with organizations that are looking to go global, I warn them about this, that going into a market that looks a lot like yours is likely to have an organization that looks a lot like you. And so the Royal Society of Chartered Accountants just built a wall around the UK. And it made it very difficult for them to get in. But it's not just about standards or trying to promote their standards. One organization I found very interesting is the American Dental Association.
Oh, yeah.
Has a big international. Why would ADA have an international arm? There are no dentists taking calls from people in other countries. Why would they be
Learning.
concerned?
Knowledge building.
Sharing information,
Yeah.
Their endorsement program, toothpaste.
That's part. Well, that is a non-dues revenue source, but that's later. What they wanted to do is they wanted to get standardized practices in dentistry. Why? Why do they care if someone in France, how dentists in France work?
So they could learn from them.
Okay.
I think so.
The main
We
reason
don't
is.
know everything in this country.
The main reason is because they wanted to, the more standardized the practices were globally, the more standardized the tools they would be working with will be, and therefore the cheaper those tools will be for American dentists. So by coming up with standardized practice in dentistry in some of the other big markets, may reduce the cost of dentistry here in the United States, and made dentistry more affordable.
You know, I'll just add one more, just a category. All the healthcare organizations, for the most part, are, you know, they are really have global practices, because healthcare is a global initiative, and it really is looking for best practices. And, you know, certification, education, sharing of knowledge, and bringing knowledge from, you know, back into the U.S. is very important. That's particularly important to ASAE. You know, we have association management, but we've been around 100 years. Somebody that's just starting and has been around 5 years, look at the tools they have that we never had. You know, we have this long history of governance projects, there may be governance initiatives. You know, there may be a much better way to do something, and really they're able to leapfrog. So I think it's the two-way learning that's also so important, and I think that's in your work. You're out there, you're doing work. How do you bring that work back to inform to inform your colleagues in the U.S. Because there's so much going on, I think, in each of these industries and each of these professions, and people are just leapfrogging, and new knowledge and new ways to do things, I think, is something that we all have to look out for and learn and be really ready to change what we're doing based on new successful practices.
Another, hopefully joining us soon, will be representative of the Grocery Marketing Association. And what they do, work on, is coming up with standards for grocery packaging. And they are developing international standards.
Yeah.
Why? Because the issue of reducing packaging and being more environmentally friendly is going to impact all of grocery stores' suppliers, regardless of where they happen to be located. And what they want, again, are standardized rules in a global environment, so that they aren't coming up with to make local and domestic and international suppliers equally competitive in their markets. And the end result there is cheaper for the consumer. And that leads to a big point I want people to realize. What I hear very often is the role of associations is to advocate to the government on behalf of their members. No, that's not what they do. An organization that uses its economic and political influence to extract economic rent for its members is not how one describes an association. It is, however, how one describes a cartel, which would be a violation of antitrust laws. So all of you who are doing that in your programs, please stop, because you could wind up behind bars. The big difference between a cartel and an association is an association does not work for the members. It works for the members' customers. You heard what Greta said associations do. They increase transparency in the market. They increase the skill capacities of their members. And who benefits from that? One of my clients was the Association for Health Information Management. It used to be called medical record technicians and now health information managers. And their mission was to improve the quality of health care by ensuring the quality of health information. Whom are they serving? Their members, the users of the data their members produce. And by doing that, they make their members more valuable. So what associations do, for the biggest part of what they do, and why globalization is so important, is that what they do is increase the transparency and reduce the friction in markets that help to grow the market to the benefit of their members. So their primary target is not the member, it's the member's customers.
Rick, that sort of moves us into an area that we now have to poll or ask everybody in the room, which is sort of Rick has begun to introduce already, and Greta has been talking about it, definitely with regards to sort of standards and certification. We now know that one of the most important things that associations can do is getting involved in terms of setting standards and developing certification types of programs. Now, Rick has sort of begun to introduce this in terms of sort of the interaction with government and other types of activities. And Rick and I have ongoing conversations about what this term should be called. And Rick likes to call it self-regulation, cooperative, what do you call it? Collaborative governance. I like usually going something like setting standards or coming up with certification. But we seem to be completely in a disagreement. So what does self-regulation mean to all of you?
Don't everyone answer at once. And let's not always see the same hands.
Go ahead, policing your own industry.
Okay. Well,
The private sector sort of policing itself.
Well, when I tried to sort of flush this out a little bit further, when I introduced this whole concept of self-regulation, people are you talking about corporate governance for associations? Sort of you self-policing yourselves? Or are you talking about creating standards and certifications? Or are you potentially talking about sort of the association's role in society in terms of their involvement with government and other stakeholders? And the true answer to this is all of the above. But when we say the word self-regulation, there's, even among association executives, there's a tremendous amount of confusion on what that really means. So we really need all of your help to sort of clarify and come up with a better term. Because somebody was telling me the other day that this meant corporate governance. And it's like, no, that's not quite it either. So if anybody does have, please, there will be a big prize.
Yes, we'll be thrilled.
In terms of if you have a better way to describe this and explain it, because I think even among association executives there's quite a bit of confusion.
Can I give an example? So we can,
Yeah.
I can give numerous, but in Afghanistan, I was working with Afghan hospitals, hospital association. There were several associations, nurses, doctors, pharmacists, what have you. None of them could get meetings with the Ministry of Public Health, because they all showed up and said, my members need this, our members need that, our members want the other thing. In fact, one of the deputy ministers of health, when I was introduced him as the association guy, he spat in Pashtun, and my translator got embarrassed. I said, I'm Boston Irish, I cannot be insulted. What did he say? And he said he doesn't like to talk to associations, they only show up to complain and whine. And that's because that's what we've taught them to do. Now I said all of them, that's not true. All of them save one, and that was the Midwives Association. Because the midwives showed up and they didn't say our members need, they said, you have a problem. The highest maternal mortality rate on the planet, and my members can fix it for you. We have examined all the standards of midwifery around the globe. We picked the ones that we think are most suitable for Afghanistan, and we have put together a training program and a certification test, and all we want you to do is use our standards, our certification when you're hiring midwives. She's the only association executive that can get a meeting at the Ministry of Health whenever she wants one. And that's what, when my phrase is collaborative governance, but because I see the role of associations is not going into the government and saying, we need you to do this. It's, here's the problem, we'll do this, we need you to do that. So it changes the relationship from associations, what is generally, because when I talk about associations in development, yes, they're the watchdog over government. It's like, this is the Socratic gadfly. Apparently, I'm the only one in the development profession who remembers what happened to Socrates. Spoiler alert, it did not end well. That it changes that relationship from being adversarial and conflictual to being collaborative.
Greta, I mean, one of the things that we're talking about this in terms of setting standards or coming up with certification programs, based on your experience, perhaps you can speak to us about why do associations sort of excel in this? Why is it something that associations should be involved in? And can you give us, again, a couple of examples of those?
I mean, I think the reason that, a couple of reasons that associations would be involved in this. One is because there's a need. And if you have a profession and you can build some kind of a certification or standards in the profession, it really helps, you want to pass that, and that helps, it really helps job development. That's one reason to do it. But it also helps safety and security. And here is one example that I like, and this is an award winner from our Power of A. We have a pretty good website on the Power of A award winners, and I was looking at it last night just because I was looking for some good examples that would resonate with this question. And the National Association of State Voting Law Administrators. Now, we say at ASAE that there is an association for everything, and now the National Association of State Voting Law Administration, I think, is a good example of there's an association for everything. But after 9/11, what they saw in the U.S. is 90,000 miles of coastline that's really monitored in very different ways, depending whether it's an ocean, a bay, a river, where it is, etc. So what they did is they worked with several government agencies, and I guess, I don't know that they went and did what the woman and what they did in Afghanistan said, you have a problem, but they did say, we have a problem. We don't have any standards for protecting our waterways. We don't have any, there's nothing that people are doing in the same way. So they developed the national standard for America's first responders working with waterways, and they did it with great cooperation from government agencies. One of the things that I really think associations can do, and it's what we just do by the nature of who we are, and that's to bring diverse groups together. We do bring diverse groups together. Associations are often a neutral party that can bring, in this case, they brought several levels of government together to look at how to secure safety within all of our shorelines across lakes, rivers, and oceans. So I think that's a very important role that associations can play. So this is a case that I think answer your question is they saw a real problem with American security, and they found a solution in bringing a lot of people together to build a standard. Yeah, Susan.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on another benefit of associations that I don't think has been touched on today, and I'll call it psychic income. When people have a feeling and a practice of self-determination, they feel independent, they create an entrepreneurial culture, they feel self-sufficient. I just came back from the Republic of Georgia for CIPE, meeting with 17 different associations in Tbilisi. And I also met with some of them last year. the same, some were the same group, some were different associations. And they had such a feeling of doing something meaningful and important in this world, and having the ability to chart their own course and create their own future. And when you think of all the associations that are around all over the world and how many people it touches, if they feel entrepreneurial and that they can make a difference and they can create democracies together by building communities, I think that's one of the biggest assets of associations. And it ties into the self-determination that you were talking about, that this group has been talking about. You know, it's not all that measurable,
Right.
but oftentimes things that aren't measurable are the most important.
But then you think that only occurs in spaces that have sort of, let's call it democratic openings? Or is this something, are they gonna be resilient enough in other, let's say?
I think it affects all the different industries and professions that associations serve.
Well, I was in Georgia when the revolution broke out, and when the government was in total disarray, the two of the groups that stepped forward was the Association of Economists and the Association of Lawyers. And they were able to come up with not a part, it wasn't this party, that party, old school, and they were able to come up with a white paper, they came up with an unbiased, unprejudiced, this is what needs to get done, and we'll help you to do it. So when you say, can it work, does it have to be a democratic environment? Well, this was in a conflict environment, and it worked, and it was the associations that stepped up.
Yeah.
I mean, I certainly see that in China, where we have an office. I think Susan makes a really good point. And I've seen that also at some meetings that ASAE has held, where people who are doing this association work, and I think we can all identify this. It can be lonely work. You're thinking, what am I really doing? How am I going to fund this? How are we going to sustain this? But when the association executives that are doing this from 16 countries came together, I mean, they just found something in the work that they were doing. And we know, we've just seen formed the African Society of Association Executives. They just had their first meeting. I mean, I just got all the pictures and they look just absolutely fabulous. And I think that she makes a very good point in the role of associations in bringing people together that then have a common purpose to do something very good for either their profession but also for their society. And one other example I'll give in the work that we've done in Korea, we worked with it when we first went to Korea, probably 8 years ago. We worked with a gentleman there, and he was just so gung-ho to build the Korean Society of Association Executive. Every moment of his life was about this. So I would go to Incheon, and he would pick me up, and that's about an hour drive. I was exhausted, so I like to listen to, all of his stories. But I asked him, why, what is so important to you about this? He said, I really feel I can do something for my country that I haven't found a way to do until I really became involved with a number of associations. And I feel if we had a society of bringing people together, because in Korea some of the associations are very large, they're government initiated, and they kind of tend to stay to themselves, but now there's a group that are coming together with the Korean Society that he's formed with others, and they're very, very excited about what they can do for their country. So it's really the role of associations in their society, in their profession, in their business.
I'm going to ask another question and then perhaps give everyone an opportunity to ask their own question. Now, USAID recently came out with this latest iteration in terms of their developing strategy, and they're calling this the journey to self-reliance. But as part of that, there's also an engagement, they say, with the private sector, which sort of would lead me to think that moving forward, there would be a much greater role for associations to play around the world in terms of actually helping and working with USAID in terms of trying to implement that. Have you seen a greater engagement in terms of, Greta, in terms of your members or stakeholders with sort of collaborating, especially as it relates to sort of some of the international types of efforts, since USAID's only focused overseas?
You know, I don't have really good examples of it. I think it's a very interesting question, but certainly, you know, a lot of the associations that we work with are made up of industry,
Mm-hmm.
are made up of companies, and, you know, I think you're seeing a lot more collaboration there, but I think it's what Rick says, it's within the members more than within the overall association.
And Rick, you know, given you just recently attended an event where they were talking really about diversifying revenues for civil society organizations. And the only thing that they were talking about there, which was USAID, was philanthropy, whatever that might mean.
Yeah.
And I know you tried to make a point of sharing with them that there are other ways that civil society can diversify revenues. Do you think, what needs to happen in terms of our work collectively, in terms of working and providing services to chambers and associations overseas, I'm speaking specifically with CIPE, or what needs to be done as association professionals in terms of, I would say, better informing, at least educating USG on perhaps the role of associations?
Well, I think not just USAID, but all the donors need to take sustainability seriously. Everyone talks about it. When I hear people talking about sustainability, I conclude two things. Everyone in development considers one, it's really important, and two, it's somebody else's job, not mine. That every person I've talked to is like, yes, you're absolutely right, but that's not what I do. And the reason for that is while we talk a good game about sustainability, it is never ever in anyone's wheelhouse. That in order for this to happen, the donors have to step up and say, okay, we want, not part of it, as I told you, I'm being brought in at the tail end. Sustainability is not part of the exit strategy, it's part of the project design. So we want your local partners to submit business plans explaining how they are going to continue to do this after you leave. Until that happens, nothing happens. The donors have, you know, my wife is a school teacher, and she rolls her eyes at all the different things they have to do, and she said that which gets counted counts. And that's what we're seeing in development, is that everyone says it's important, but it's never is there any measure for it, never is there any part of the plan as to how it's going to be achieved. It is what I refer to as the Field of Dreams School of Organizational Capacity Building. You know, it's we're going to put these organizations together. We're going to fund them for 3 or 4 years, and then at the end of it, local stakeholders will automatically see how value it is and step in to fund it. Okay, which stakeholders, when, how much, why? None of this gets answered. So that needs to be a key part of it. And more generally, you mentioned the journey to self-reliance. The 3 biggest issues in development are the sustainability of institutional organization building and results, corruption, and the closing of civil society space. These are not separate issues. That when we create civil society in an adversarial role, we almost invite the government to put them down. I was at a session on sustainability a year or so ago. I think you were there as well. And we broke into groups, and the group I was in, there was a person I knew from USAID across from me, and everyone was talking about, well, they need to be this watchdog and on and on. And I said, well, I think we should announce this now. I've just signed a contract with this her office, and she's looking at me, what the hell are you talking about? And I said that I am going to be the sustainability officer, and I'm going to be working with each and one of your projects and determining whether or not you're doing it right. So you need to know that every misstep, every misspent dollar, every mistake you make, not only be reported back to USAID, but be very, very likely wind up in the front page of the Wall Street Journal. So can I put you down for Tuesday at 11? That's the position you're putting civil society in, that you need to change the confrontational role, and that when civil society becomes part of the governance process, it changes the relationship from confrontational to cooperative. It also, it now makes them a partner, so it reduces the tendency of government to try to close civil society space. And what I recommend is do not try to go after the organization, the agency that's going against you. Find agencies that will benefit from what you do and work with them. And I can give examples, but I won't go into it right now. The other thing is that every study after study after study after study, has corruption has found that the major reason for corruption is not poverty, it's not inequity, it's not judicial uncertainty, it's the opportunity to take a bribe. And every regulation you encourage an association to demand becomes yet another opportunity to take a bribe. So if you want to reduce corruption, stop doing that. Stop asking the government to do stuff. That what they need to do, what you need is say, there are, Greta mentioned earlier, my definition of advocacy. The goal of advocacy is not to change government laws, legislation, or policies. It is to influence economic behavior, economic and social behaviors and outcomes. That's what you're trying to do. There are 3 ways to do that: market forces, social influence, approbation, taboos, and government regulation. Of the 3, the most expensive, the most risky, and the least sustainable is government regulation. Yet in international development, it's everybody's go-to move. That what I tell organizations, so my definition is you need to look at this, the market, civil society, and government as organizations that can influence economic social behaviors. I tell associations, do not give this away. That is a revenue generating asset demonstrated by every bribe ever taken. That you hold on to that for yourself. And that advocacy is really an ongoing negotiation as to how economic and social behavior should be influenced by market forces, civil society, or the government. It's not a one-off.
Thank you, Rick. I'm going to open this up for any questions. Do we have anybody?
Well, I've had a lot of discussions with folks here at CIPE about associations in developing countries. And what I've heard a lot is that very few of them are apex organizations. To become a standard-setting organization, I think you need to be an apex organization of some type to be able to speak more broadly within a sector or within a country. And I'm curious what your thoughts are about how associations in developing countries can move towards this, because it might be that they have to join forces, reorganize, and develop that kind of broader umbrella organization.
That's not how they've emerged in the U.S. Or that it usually starts off very specific and then generalizes. When I was in Kosovo, the Project Management Institute wanted to come in and set up a chapter, and they were failing miserably. And I said, that's because
That's a good example.
that's because no one here understands they need project management. What they understand they need is more efficient farms, more efficient farm policy, more efficient industry collaboration. So what I told them to do is do not try to come in and set up a chapter of your society. Come in and offer training in agriculture, in bookkeeping, in the various areas that are being developed. 10 years from now, people are going to say, you know what we need an organization that applies to all of us. But you start off by going after the low-hanging fruit. Where is the most value, and do it there. And also, the main thing is credibility. Now, you mentioned self-regulation, regulating yourself. Rarely does that happen. One of the best examples here in the States, how many are familiar with the Underwriter Labs, the UL label? How many of you have seen it? Tell me, everybody. Mm-hmm. That started in the 1880s when electrical appliances coming in and they were burning houses down. So it was the insurers, not the manufacturers. People were paying the claims said, we are going to create a laboratory and we will test products. And if they pass our safety standards, you can put the UL label on it. And if that causes a fire, we will pay for it. Our members will pay the claim. But if you have a fire that's been caused by something that has not been approved by UL, then you're out of luck. So that's how the standards developed. And it wasn't the electrical appliance manufacturers policing themselves. It was the people who were paying for their screw-ups who stepped in and said, no, we're gonna do this. Because it was to our benefit. And their standard was absolutely credible because they had skin in the game.
Greta?
I mean, I don't have anything to add at all. But I'd love to, what I'd love to do is hear from some of you in terms of your own experiences working in trying to build sustainability and do some of the things that we've been talking about.
I agree. With sustainability is the name of the game. I think it is to some extent. It should be for CIPE. It's certainly in every USAID RFI coming out. And whether they understand what it means or not, it's all over. It's all over every RFI that's coming out. There are hundreds of millions of dollars of programs coming down the pike in Jordan right now, for example, which is a country that I am responsible for here. Every one of them is plastered with sustainability, the word sustainability. When it comes to associations, I think our job is to help them be competitive and successful on the local market for the goods and for the products and services that they provide to their industry. And that requires, I agree with your point, development of a viable and execution of a viable business plan to the extent that we can get to execution within a given program. Too often the development community, and we're amongst friends here, I include CIPE in this, does a disservice to these associations when we go in and dump a whole lot of grant money on them for to do things that they should be doing on their own. Now often that requires an investment, a little bit of an investment on our part to including financial, to bring certain products and services online, but then it needs to feed into a larger business plan and be viable locally without our grant support. And I don't think we do a good enough job of that, and we can improve. We've been doing more of that, but that's an area I think for continued focus on our part, and that's what we can sell in terms of sustainability.
Can I comment on that? Again, USAID talks a good game about sustainability, but when it actually comes down to it, a lot of times associations are used as conduits for project services. And in Jordan, I was there, and it was a microfinance project, and the day I showed up, they were doing microfinancing with women business owners. And I asked the chief of party, why are you doing this? Because there are two women business associations in this country. You should be running it through them. Because they can charge for this. You can't. And by charging, that will work without, the only people who show up are the people who see a value in it because they're paying for it. And the people who are showing up for the free lunch will stay home. Therefore, the people who really want to get a loan will have more direct contact and more personal attention. And he said, you're absolutely right, but we are being evaluated on how many women's businesses get trained, how many loan applications get submitted, and how much loan, what the total number of loans that go out the door. And you're telling me the better way to do this is to turn an association and let them charge, which will reduce the number of people getting trained. That ain't happening, Rick.
Yeah.
So you need to look at the entire project to see the degree to which the donors are actually reducing the incentives.
There's a perverse incentive at work.
Yeah.
I agree, because there's this persistent pattern within the USAID's economic development programs. We see them with active ones in the region right now, where they're providing the program itself is providing firm level assistance instead of working through local associations and other service providers. I mean, that's where your sustainability comes in.
I spent 2 years in Kosovo, and there, working with agricultural associations, the guy working with dairy said they wanted our project to buy hoof boxes, which you put a cow in so that you can check its hooves and so it won't move because of the amount of hoof disease. I said, well, why isn't that being done now? Well, there just aren't enough. Why aren't there enough? Well, because there aren't. And if we do this, the people go and give these to the association, then the association can have this done. And I said, absolutely not. Because here's what's going to happen. Not might happen, could happen. This is what will happen. That the association is going to be giving this, letting this thing be used for free, which means no money's going to go into maintenance. That 4 years from now, when we're leaving, these hoof boxes are going to be falling apart, and everyone will be right back where they started from. Except for the 3 veterinarians we chased out of business, they're going to be waiting tables in Pristina. So we need to look and say, no, we can't be giving this away. And one of the things I did there, it proved to be very successful, was I created a donor roundtable, because we weren't the only ones creating associations. And when I went to the various donors, it was GTI, the Germans, when I told them I'd try to do it, he said, that's a great idea, and I went to explain, he said, no, I got it. Your associations cannot raise money outside of dues and grants if the rest of us are carpet bombing the countryside with workshops. Yes.
Is there, oh yeah, I would love a
Yeah.
successful example of somebody who's really seen some good results, or had a good time with this, or,
Actually, I was just going to complain about the same issue.
no, okay, well then I would.
Go ahead.
The big challenge, on sustainability for us sometimes is that, for example, we encourage, of course, our association partners to charge for events and training and things that, they have the opportunity to use as a revenue generator. But unfortunately, we also see that a lot of donors do not want them to charge fees for events that are co-organized with that donor, or organized, with partial donor funding. They sometimes have regulations that they're not allowed to charge at all for that event. And then it creates really an expectation in the market that all of this training should be offered for free. And they're really not willing to pay for any kind of for-fee service or training that the associations are able to offer. So really there's a lot of distortion happening in the market, and it just creates a huge challenge for us, especially in a country like Georgia, where there is a significant amount of donor funding. Yeah, what has worked for us though is that we, for one association or for several associations there, for example the Farmers Association, we have supported them to start doing focus groups and just interviews with farmers across the country to see what type of services they would be willing to pay for. And so that's put us on track to hopefully have some membership packages that they can offer for a fee, because now they offer all of their services just for free. So hopefully, we'll see where that goes.
Your membership is offered for free as well.
Yeah, it's really,
Which
it makes
is
it hard for them
wrong.
to start
No.
introducing anything for a fee at all.
I think membership being offered for free, you're saying it's wrong, but I think that's a practice that we've seen a lot of. I know in India, for example, you pay once, and we once sent someone to do a workshop on renewing membership, and they found out pretty early on the game that you pay once and you're a member for life, and so that workshop didn't really work too well.
Greta, one of the questions I really have for you is how do you see, how have associations really evolved in perhaps the last 10 years? And I think membership might be one of the areas, but in terms of what you're seeing out there in the industry, can you talk to us about some of the trends and perhaps some of the challenges and opportunities?
Yeah, I think that the issue with associations that we've seen over the last 10 years is really defined in the title of a couple of books. How do you stay relevant when people, you used to be the information, the knowledge source. People can get their knowledge in other places. So I think the associations are really looking at, what do they really offer? And a lot of what they offer, it comes down to some of the psychic benefits that Susan mentioned. It comes down to the ability to feel like you can make a change in your area and you can find a home for yourself. But I think the race for relevance is for associations is a big trend. We do have a new study, Foresight Works, which looks at many areas in the society, and then associations go, there are like 60 of them, and associations pick which ones will help them organize themselves for the future. I think the globalization is another area that associations have looked at. particularly in health and engineering, there's obviously natural, there's no language, there's no country borders. So I think globalization has grown quite a bit over the last, you said 8 or 10 years, it's grown quite a bit. I think relevance, the globalization, I think really trying to come in and figure out what you do offer that's valuable. What we find is that there's so much information out there that if you have a way to figure out what really is valuable for people. This is an old example. When Susan and I were there, we used to have a knowledge center, and the knowledge center was for librarians. And you would call, and the librarian would tell you, well, they would send you a printout of 100 things that you could do to solve your problem. And, what we do now is really, what people want is tell me the 3 best. I don't need 100. I don't have time to go through that. So I think anything you can do, which, really as a concierge, to make what you have you're trying to solve people's problems. And I think we're spending a lot more attention on that. What can we do to really solve a problem? How do we know what your problems are? And what can we do to give you the 3 things that might help you solve your problem? So I think it's taking your knowledge and creating it in a much more relevant way for people. But I also think the psychic benefits of joining, of having face-to-face opportunities, having face-to-face, which is even, online, and I think is really still a value.
Building community.
Building community. Yeah. How else would you all answer that question based on your experience? What would you add? Because you're out there seeing if how this is going to work in difficult circumstances. Anyway, relevance, community, and problem solving, and making a difference in feeling that you're making a difference in the society. That I think we find that people that they're people that are brand new, and they're people that have been around a long time in associations, and those people want to give back. They want the opportunity to give back to their profession, to their industry, to their society, and we've certainly found that in other parts of the world.
And I'll share with you one, which I think is becoming ever more complicated, and you've sort of hinted at it, is communication.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you communicate, and what information are you going to be providing? And I think that's becoming, as it's become easier, it's become a lot more challenging, because people are just, overburdened in terms of their emails. But that might not be the best way to do that. So you need to come up with innovative ways to communicate.
Yeah. I want to hammer on this idea of relevance. When you talk about what needs to be done and being relevant, what's of value, number one is make sure you get the right problem. That what I see in a lot of projects is they go in and they see the behavior and they treat the behavior. These people aren't feeding their cows, and they're not checking the hook boxes, so what we need to do is show them how to do that. You're not teaching them anything they can't Google in a lot of cases. So the question you need to ask is not, they're doing this, how to get them to not stop doing that. Ask them, what are the barriers that have prevented this from happening in the first place? Why isn't this just happening organically? In the case in Kosovo, they weren't putting money into producing decent product, and I'm not talking about in terms of quality. It was so poor that when I first met there, I asked a person with a degree in pharmacology and working in finance. I said, "Do you ever use your pharmacology degree?" And she said, "Oh yeah, sure, when a member of the family gets food poisoning." And I stared at her. In the back of my mind, I was thinking, note to self, she did not say if, she said when.
Wow.
And the problem was the bribery that was taking place in the Ministry of Health for food, for dairy and poultry. And teaching them how to train to feed this cow was not going to address the real problem. So what I proposed instead was, okay, we're going to go to, I found a Land O'Lakes project in Macedonia that was doing lab testing for quality on poultry and dairy, and went not to the Ministry of Health, I went to the Ministry of Trade and said, you can't get your stuff into Macedonia because they won't let it because of the poor quality. It's going to be awfully hard for them to make that argument if there's a Macedonian quality seal on it, won't it? And then it went to the Ministry of Finance and said, you keep complaining that our members aren't registering in, their businesses and going on the tax rolls. Well, the reason they're not doing that is they're trying to stay under the radar from the Ministry of Health with the bribes. If you support this independent testing service, we will work with the members to get them on the tax rolls. And then we went to the Ministry of Health. There was no fight. We didn't accuse them of being thieves and corrupt and on and on. We just went in and we said we want to start this. But you see, health is a B-level ministry, whereas finance and trade are an A-level ministry. And phone calls had already gone from those ministries to the PM's office, and the PM's office to the Ministry of Health. And we walked in the door, they said, when can you start? So one is, make sure, 9 times out of 10, when I show up and you say, well, they don't want to pay for the service, are they saying that what you have is no value? That are you really looking at the right problem? And so one of the other tools I came up with was what I call the structure, conduct, performance iceberg. What you see, the behavior is what, structure, I don't know how you're familiar with the paradigm, but a behavior is driven by rules of conduct, and those conduct, and that's determined by the structure. So what are the structural rigidities that are preventing the right incentives to put in place to wind up with the behaviors we want? Go after that, not the behaviors. And so,
Thank you. Well, cognizant of time, we're a bit over. I want to thank everyone here. Definitely want to thank Greta and Rick for sharing these, and Susan and others for sharing such all of these insights. And again, we will stay a little bit afterwards. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to come and ask us. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.